Episode 4. Who controls language? There's one thing that you can benefit from by learning another language, and that is to understand the world differently when you speak a different language. And by viewing the world differently, you're able to interpret things differently. There's many scientific studies that have pointed to that, great things that have been done, good research, and more, as the world globalizes and becomes smaller because we're able to travel more freely and because we're able to move to different areas, or we're able to try to understand a lot of these languages and speak them, we're seeing the huge cleavage that happens between these various languages. And I'm reminded of this because of a couple things that have popped up. One is the term Latinx. This has been very interesting. Whenever I took my classes in Spanish and myself was living in Florida and using Spanish a lot, there was never any push to use the term Latinx. That is, instead of using the Latino and the Latina, you use the Latinx to make it gender neutral whenever you speak about a Hispanic or Latino person. I myself don't know anyone who uses this, but I do see it in media. I've seen political candidates use it. I've seen it mostly on social media. I've never really heard anyone in person say it. But there's this strange change that a lot of people want to do. And there's an article here about a poll that shows that only 2% of all Hispanics actually prefer the more politically correct term Latinx. It's as if, they want to have this change maybe organically, and they would like to put out this Latinx phrase, but most people are not having it. And I know that in Spain, they have a kind of Spanish language institute or group that tries to be the final arbiter of what the language is, and they have not yet agreed to this. And I think it's very fascinating to see that there's a lot of cultural push to use it, but really the rest of society is not catching up. And another example that I'm seeing is in French. There's this sort of push to try to get rid of the agreement that you have between various genders whenever you're using a past participle. It's a bit kind of difficult to explain in English, but essentially if you are describing particular things in, let's say, the past tense, and there's an object involved, you would try to have agreement between the gender and the plurality. And there's a push now by various French language organizations and institutes, much like I mentioned the Spanish one, to change that and simplify it so that you don't have any of these agreements anymore and you just use a standard conjugation. Now, this is kind of fascinating because it's pushes to the language that people are trying to make centrally or from the top down that a lot of people are not necessarily following. I conducted my own mini scientific survey on social media asking about this, and no one that I know uses this. Perhaps there are some media outlets that use it, but I am noticing a bit more in Belgian media and a little bit in Quebec media that they have used it a bit. To the trained eye, it looks like it's grammatically incorrect, but to those who are just kind of reading quickly, you don't really see it. And that's just kind of interesting. There is no central English language authority, mostly because you have such power now in the United States versus Britain, which was really the kind of origin nation of the English language. And it's more defined by the people. New words come into use and they're adopted, and then you have sort of the dictionaries that come out every year and just say, look, we've recognized this new word. And this is something that is kind of interesting to think about when we look at other languages too. How does this work in Russian? How does this work in the languages in the former Yugoslavia? How does it work for Serbian or Croatian? That I don't know. I'd be interested to hear any feedback on that. But to really think of it philosophically, who controls language? Ideally, it would just be us. It would be the people. It would be what we find agreeable. Because we can, at any time, choose to change it. That's why you have such different dialects. You have such different diction and uses of terms in different regions of the world, whether it be Swiss French, Quebec French, English that's spoken in South Africa or Australia or the United States, Spanish that's spoken in Chile or in Spain. This stuff is, I think, very fascinating. It's cool to see it evolve, and I think that's why language, which is one of the most organic and dynamic sort of patterns of speech and understanding that we have, is something to really follow. It's why I'm constantly trying to be a student of language. I'm always trying to improve the ones that I speak, or the ones that I'm trying to speak wherever I might live, particularly German, which is incredibly hard. But it's one to think about. So that's kind of my spiel. What is the main power source behind language and who controls it? That's all for now. Au revoir et à la prochaine.